first-year scholars at Yale. My name is Suzanne Selensky, class of '83, Trumbull College, and as a member of 1stGen Yale, I'm coordinating this year's 1stGen Yale FSY panel and discussions. You already know what the FSY program is, but you may not know that for 5 years in a row, and this is the 5th year, 1stGen Yale has been a part of it. And being curious, you may also be wondering what 1stGen Yale is. We're a group of Yale alumni, many of whom were the first in our families to go to college, or who came from low-income or underserved or underrepresented backgrounds. Regardless of what our lives and our families were like before we came to Yale, we have a few things in common. First of all, of course, we all went to Yale. More important, we continue to stay active in the Yale family. You are the newest members of the Yale family, but alumni, those who graduated from Yale, are also a part of it. For us, getting our degrees from Yale did not mean that we left that family. It just meant that we took on new roles within it. And what are those roles? Many of us continue to stay connected to Yale and to each other through community service and engagement, through lifelong learning opportunities, through career and life advice and networking, and through friendships. At 1stGen Yale especially, we share our stories, we listen to and learn from each other, and we aim to have a positive impact on the lives of Yale alumni and students like you. One way that 1stGen Yale does that is by participating in the FSY program. Usually we do that by coming to campus one day, by having an in-person panel discussion, by taking questions from students and mingling and meeting with them. This year, of course, like you, we're participating virtually. And what you're hearing today is the first part of our involvement, a panel discussion. I'd like to emphasize that all Yale alumni, not just members of 1stGen Yale, are resources for current Yale students. But today, you're going to hear from 4 alumni in particular. They represent a broad range of experiences, of career journeys, and of interests, and they are definitely interested in supporting and mentoring current students. Like you, they all made the transition to Yale, and they faced some challenges along the way. It is our hope that as you listen to them describe their paths to, through, and after Yale, you will know that you are not alone. You too have drive and resilience, and you belong at Yale. On July 25th, you'll get the chance to meet these alums in real time and ask them questions to continue the conversation. But for now, I'd like to introduce each of them and ask each of them to tell you a little bit about themselves. So I'll start first up with Nicole Sanchez Astapuma, class of 2018. Nicole.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and my residential colleges were Brantford and Pauli Murray. I majored in ethnicity, race, and migration in class of 18, and I'm a first-generation low-income Venezuelan Peruvian from Queens, New York City, and that's where I'm currently located right now. So I'm an educator dedicated to social justice, empowering communities, and conscious global leadership. I'm currently volunteering with 1stGen Yale and the Emergency Release Fund, which provides mutual aid so LGBTQ and medically vulnerable individuals aren't detained prior to trial in NYC jails. Before COVID-19, I was a Yale China Fellow who taught English at Yale High School in Hunan, China. And while I was at Yale, I was involved in Questbridge, DanceWorks, Isaac International, and La Casa. And I was also a counselor for Cultural Connections and a FROCO. So I've been lucky to have the opportunity to live and study in 4 different continents. And I've also had experience in law, working at different firms, and my hobbies include dance, wellness practices, and anything media from movies to comics. So that's a little bit about me. I'm really excited to be on this panel with everyone.
Thank you, Nicole. And next I'd like to introduce Andrew Burgee, class of 1987. Andrew.
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. Again, I'm Andrew Burgee, class of 1987, Brantford College. So fellow Brantfordite, that's great. I'm the Hazardous Materials Training Coordinator at New York University School of Global Public Health in New York City. We're on a grant from the National Institute of Health that deals with hazardous waste worker training, and I've been doing that for quite a while. I first started at NYU specifically 3 years ago, but before that, I was the co-director of the Center for Occupational and Environmental Health out of Hunter College in New York City. I was with them since 2000 and worked on several projects training emergency responders. So I was there during 9/11 with the whole situation with the World Trade Center disaster. So that was a very historic and very emotional time to be a part of the field at the time. And I'm also very active in my American Industrial Hygiene Association. But the main thing I want to talk about was the Yale Alumni Association affiliations that I do have. I'm on 3 boards: the Yale Alumni Association of New York, the Yale Alumni Non-for-Profit Alliance, and the Yale Alumni Service Corps. With the Yale NYC, which is the other name for the Metropolitan New York section. I've been the Public Service Social Justice Coordinator of that since 2009. And I've been coordinating different public service initiatives on Prospect Park, St. Xavier's Soup Kitchen since 2009, well actually 2008. And that's been a very rewarding experience being a part of different types of service opportunities. With the Yale Alumni Not-for-Profit Alliance, I was one of the founders of the Yale Community Connect initiative, where we took the Yale Day of Service initiatives and tried to do them on a regular basis. Instead of just doing for one day, we're trying to do it, consistently every year throughout the year. I've been working with Allison Gardy with that. She's the chair of that presently. And then finally with the Yale Alumni Service Corps, I've been with them for about 8 trips now, various places from China to Ghana. And I've always been dealing mainly with environmental education when I've been on those trips and some public health initiatives. And again, that's also been rewarding working with fellow classmates and doing different initiatives. And I'd like to thank the Yale First Generation organization for having me here today.
Thank you, Andrew. We're glad you could join us. Next, I'd like to introduce Barb Protasio, class of 1981. Barb.
Hi, I was the first in my family to attend college. I was adopted as a baby in Guatemala by US parents, and I grew up a third culture child in 5 countries in Latin America. At Yale, I majored in architecture and lettered in crew. I became a US Naval Intelligence Officer, retiring after 30 years at the rank of captain. In 2014, I switched careers through Teach for America and now serve my community as a 1st grade teacher here in Northern Virginia. For Yale, I directed the Virginia Tidewater Alumni Schools Committee, interviewed applicants, and I serve as a founding executive on the committee for 1stGenYale DC and 1stGenYale. My 2 children followed my footsteps to Yale, and they're the class of 14 and 15. So my name, Barbara, I've realized recently comes from the Greek word for stranger. And looking back at my childhood, I see how my name, although it wasn't chosen because of that, it was uniquely appropriate. I was a stranger in the different countries I went to live in, and I was a stranger in the US because I didn't actually grow up here. But then at the same time, I realized that in those great variety of cultures that I learned that people had different perspectives and that they all should be valued. At Yale, we were all wonderfully unique and different, but not necessarily all strangers to the college experience. To use an analogy, as a 1st-gen Yale college student, I had to face incoming waves of college challenges and swim through, under, or over on my own without support and a network of family or contacts or preparation or role models or a game plan. I thought it was my own personal fault that not knowing how to navigate these challenges and experiences without the right equipment or the right coaches or finding the best maneuvers. But now I know differently, and I hope to be out there with you in the waters that are challenges for you. Just because you're the first, you're not necessarily alone. And you have us to help you, to cheer you on as alumni and as 1stGen Yale. And I hope to see you excitingly surf the waves that come, the exciting new knowledge that you learn, and watch you sail out purposefully on this sea that might be strange to you right now.
Thank you, Barb. And our 4th panelist is Mar Farenblum, class of 1956. Mar.
a long time ago. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I have an interesting background in that my mother was a Polish-Jewish refugee, and my dad had a long-term illness. So as I was growing up, my home away from home was the Boys Club in Greenwich, where I live now. Graduating from Greenwich High School, I was fortunate to receive a full scholarship to Yale from the Yale Alumni Association of Greenwich. And as a swimmer, that was one of my major activities as a freshman on the swimming team. 30 hours in the pool, 16 hours in the kitchen washing dishes as a part of the scholarship, and wound up majoring in American Studies, writing a thesis in the labor field, and then gaining a master's degree in industrial labor relations from Cornell University. And my entire career in corporate America was in the labor and human resources field. I worked for major corporations, including Exxon. And then in the latter part of my corporate career, I ran the New York office of Heidrick & Struggles, which was one of the largest executive search firms in the world. 17 years ago, I moved then past my corporate career to the nonprofit community and became the president and CEO of National Executive Service Corps, which provides management talent to help strengthen nonprofit communities. We have affiliates all over the country. I'm still associated there as vice chairman. Along the way, I've been involved very much in nonprofit activities, particularly with an emphasis on fighting prejudice. I'm a national commissioner of the Anti-Defamation League. And I would say that my main interest always has been on the sensitivity associated with slurs and all the other things that I found hurtful and harmful when I was a kid, when I fought my way to school and fought my way back home. So Yale has always been a consuming interest of mine, and I had the pleasure of founding something called Yale Alumni College, and I'm very active there now as the chairman emeritus and founder. That's my story, and I look forward to participating in this panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Marv. The last person I'm going to introduce is our moderator, Professor Laura Bearclough. As an associate professor of American Studies, she teaches and advises students in the ethnicity, race, and migration, and environmental studies programs. She has been the faculty advisor for FSY for 3 years, and we are delighted that she has agreed once again to moderate our panel discussion. So Professor Bearclough, it's all yours. Thank you.
Great, and thank you to Suzanne and Lisa Chapman and 1stGenYale for organizing this session. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've had the pleasure of moderating panels like this for the last couple of years, and what we see when we're together in person is that students and alumni who might be 50 years apart or 1 year apart in terms of when they expect to graduate from Yale, nonetheless find all kinds of interesting connections with each other. And sometimes those are things like sharing, you know, histories of washing dishes together in the commons, or as part of their scholarship or of their own student contribution. And sometimes it's something deeper and more profound. And we can't anticipate what those will be. But this panel, again, is just to launch those connections. And I hope all of you FSY students who are watching this will join us on July 25th so that you can connect in smaller groups with the alumni who are here today and others as well. So I want to start by asking our alumni panelists to put yourself in the shoes of the FSY students. And normally I would say, you know, normally we'd be doing this panel like in mid-July, but on campus, and the FSY students would be there together. And I would say to you all as the panelists, you know, think back and imagine those first few days of your own time on campus. And what do you remember about that transition? Either the day itself when you were moving in, or just your first few days as you were adjusting to being on campus at Yale. And of course, for the FSY students watching this, we don't know exactly when that will be. Our schedule remains in flux, but nonetheless, we know FSY students, you'll be here on campus soon, right? Someday soon. And so I'd love to hear from our alumni what that transition to being on campus was like. What stands out to you?
Well, I remember standing in front of Connecticut Hall with the other, these were guys at the time, it was a single-sex school, and everybody seemed to be a captain of a football team or valedictorian. They were all from these uh, private schools that were well recognized globally, and they all seemed to know each other and had nicknames for each other, and were wearing white buck shoes, and were dressed similarly, and I really felt totally out of it. And I thought, wow, am I in the right place? And am I someone that can actually succeed here? So my first impression was one of lack of confidence and feeling uncertain about myself.
Yeah, I would piggyback on what Marv was saying in the sense that, when I first arrived, it was something where you're obviously a little nervous because you're in a new place and you do want to make a good, good impression. But one of the things that really stuck in my mind was sort of that importance of trying to be your own person, in the sense that, whether, regardless of your background, I think it's something where you want to have a name for yourself. It's like, for most of your life, you go through life being the son or the daughter of somebody, or the younger, older brother of somebody. And maybe you've gone to the same schools in the past with each other and they confuse your name with that person's name. And it's sort of like, you're in college, like finally I could break away from that system. I could actually be my own person and recognize in my own right. And even though you're a little nervous, there's that excitement where it's like, here's a chance to sort of have a new beginning. People don't really know who you are. And it's a new beginning that doesn't have any precedence to it. And it's sort of what you make of it. So are you going to grab the bull by the horns or not, even though you're nervous?
Well, for me, it was exciting and magical and a little bit humiliating. I showed up on campus not knowing how unprepared I really was. I didn't know that many students had already been on campus for weeks in summer programs or had visited campus before. It was my very first time ever setting foot at Yale. And I'd only had a little thin lookbook to look at because I was coming in from overseas. I didn't even know that freshmen were housed on old campus. So here's the story. All I knew was that I was assigned to Ezra Stiles College. And so that's where I insisted I had to go. And when the befuddled upperclassmen had lugged all my suitcases in the hazy New Haven humid heat, and we found out there that the seemingly random VB32 on my computer card meant that I was at Vanderbilt Hall, room 32, back on old campus. So back we went, but this time they found a car and a student with a car to load all my things in, and my mom and myself and the upperclassmen all loaded in and went back to old campus. And I can only imagine what they said about me after that. What a start. It's pretty funny looking back. Of course, I was thankful for the help from the upperclassmen, but looking back, I realized that it was a failure of the system to prepare and support students who were new to the whole college experience or coming from overseas. And now I'm really glad that there's programs like yours and that 1stGenYale exists, and we're here to help you.
So I would say for me, I came in through already being a little bit familiar with campus because I had done the Yale Young Global Scholars program during my junior year. And I got in contact through that I got into that program through QuestBridge, which can provide a national scholarship, and I was a full ride scholar. So that was how I even managed to get on campus, like before entering in the first place. And I was able to visit because I went to a high school called Stuyvesant, a specialized magnet school specializing in math and science. And they had a trip to go visit different schools, which included Yale as well. So I was familiar as to what campus looked like. Because I'm in New York City, it was easy to go to Bulldog Days. And so I had a sense of campus a little bit before I moved in. But living on campus was still, a whole experience in of itself. I wasn't just visiting for a couple of weeks or anything like that. And yeah, I remember just a big flurry. It's a big flurry of memories. Just everyone meeting everybody, upperclassmen helping you move in, everyone being really, really excited. And even though I was also excited, I was also nervous and a little overwhelmed with the amount of energy and people that I was meeting. I consider myself extroverted, but I still remember being really tired every day. I felt like I felt that Camp Yale or the beginning was like years. And, you know, residential colleges, the housing is a bit of a social experiment, that it works out or it doesn't work out. I know I didn't get along super well with my first year college roomie. I know extracurriculars and other campus spaces are just rushing to welcome you and let you know that, you know, you can be a part of their communities as much as you want to be. And there's a cappella rush, and the fraternity sororities also reaching out. And so I just remember it being just a really a big flurry. So even though, because of my high school, I knew what to expect a little more academically or with seminars, the social transition, I think, ended up being different and challenging in some ways. So that's something that I can talk about later, as being a challenge.
Thank you. And so, Andrew, you mentioned in your comments that college, any college, including Yale, can be such an exciting time when you really do get to break free, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, but you get a chance, right, to reinvent yourself and to establish yourself within a new community of people who may or may not know anything about you or where you come from. And there can be things about that that are terrifying, and there are things about that that can be really exciting. And so I wanted to follow up and ask how each of you began to find a sense of community at Yale. So how, or maybe where, you began to find a sense of community at Yale, especially during your first year.
Well, I would say, sort of, I guess, piggybacking what other people were saying before, as far as the importance of having different people that were mentors that were set up within the system. I know with the residential colleges, they had a sort of a big sister, big brother program, so that the sophomores would sort of befriend the freshmen. That was one way. I know that the Afro-Am House, they had a sort of a minority coordinator at large. So I remember mine was a graduate student at the time, Jesse Wardlaw. He was in the medical program, got a chance to see my first cadavers. So it was something where they had different people that if you want to reach out, that they could give you experience and sort of give you a little idea of what the campus can offer. And that was really nice, you know. But just really, as far as hitting on the church, I grew up religious, Presbyterian. My mother was a minister, even though she didn't have her own church. So even connecting with a place like Untitled Chapter when I first came as a freshman, that was an important part. Freshman conference, they had a 3-day program at the time where there was like a camp that Yale owned where you had an opportunity to meet up with various freshmen a few days before school opened up. So there are just various opportunities that are sort of built into the system that were trying to introduce you to different people. So that kind of, like you said, broke the ice a little bit, and you got a chance to sort of know people and sort of connect with people.
There's nothing like being on a team because that really gave me a chance to relate to my fellow classmates and for that matter, the members of other classes at Yale. And from all over the world. It was an amazing thing. The team attracted swimmers from as far away as Australia. And I guess we were thought to have the best team in the world at the time, terrific coaching, and a lot of helping hands, a lot of people that are helping me, not just as a swimmer, but as a human being. I did have very strong values when I came to Yale, and fortunately, I was still open to others' opinions and welcome to helping hand as it was extended. And I think that was all part of feeling safe, needed, and stimulated.
Barb or Nicole, how did you begin to feel like Yale was home for you?
Well, actually, I found a place on a sports team crew, but not until after my first year. So I think it's important to join an extracurricular activity, one that is mature enough to have an organized plan for novice members, as a sports team does. They usually will train, and even some of them have walk-ons, which is what I did at Crew, where it gives you a place to go to, a schedule, a time, a group of people who are all oriented towards the same kind of goal. So that was already helpful in a sense. And I would go and try something, even if it's brand new, with a friend or a roommate when you go to one of these activities, because a few that I had tried on my own and that didn't really develop newcomers. I found some bullying and some hyper competitiveness or bias. I don't know if it's that way nowadays. I think most programs are mature, and extracurricular activities have a good welcoming environment for newbies. But sports teams were really a great avenue at Yale. And I loved crew, and it's become part of my life. I was a coach for high school students and so forth afterwards as well.
Just to sort of piggyback on what Barbara was saying, also a lot of the residential colleges, they have intramural programs. So whatever sport you're interested in, volleyball, football, baseball, basketball, they had opportunities. So it's a great opportunity to know upperclassmen, and even if you weren't the greatest athlete in the world, you could still, find a place in your freshman year. And like I said, there's some sports that you may never play, like inner tube water polo. So there's a lot of esoteric things that were a lot of fun.
Yeah, so for me, I think there were at that point there's a lot of more support within the system, so there's more structures for that. So I really would like to thank the people who came before me in helping to make that or raise awareness of those things. But I just remember there being lots of communication. I managed to meet a lot of people by communicating, socializing, just shopping many classes, going to so many extracurricular meetings, talking to professors more closely was intimidating for me. So I did that a little in the beginning, but I got better through that. And I think as a newbie, everyone's really excited that you're there. And if this is a concern of yours, very forgiving if you don't know how to handle some things. I think FLI students or FLY students are used to having a lot of stake and maybe risk adverse in some ways. So I felt that, unless I had to prepare so much to talk to professors or felt this kind of pressure, and with time I was less hard on myself and able to, accept the inevitable mistakes that will come up or any feedback gracefully. So I just remember in my first year, a lot of things would happen spontaneously. My roommate would say, hey, come with me to go to this YPU meeting, or, oh, let's go to La Casa and eat something. Or a lot of things were very spontaneous like that. But there were also a lot of structured events, I think, to encourage you to meet people outside of the extracurriculars or interests that you usually have, and to step out of that and be able to meet people in new spaces. So for me, being very open and flexible and vulnerable as I deemed appropriate was really helpful during my first year.
Nicole, in your last comments, you actually anticipated what I wanted to ask you all next, and which is about some of the bigger challenges that you faced at Yale. We've actually already heard several of them in the conversation so far. We've heard everything from getting lost kind of on your first day, or not knowing which building to go to, or maybe not making best friends with your roommate, or being nervous about approaching professors in office hours. These are all part and parcel of becoming a college student for so many of us. And so now I want to ask you all to sort of go deeper into that area. What do you remember standing out as challenges that you faced during your time at Yale? It doesn't have to necessarily be in the first year, but over the time that you spent here, what were the challenges, or maybe one big challenge that you faced? And also, how did you manage that and hopefully overcome it?
As I mentioned, I was a nationally recognized ranked swimmer, actually, but I was also a singer and a violinist. So I was a musician, and I had been singing opera during the summers of my freshman and sophomore year. And I thought, even though I've competed now all these years in the pool, and at Greenwich High School I could do everything. It didn't matter. You could multitask, but not at Yale. I had to make a decision. And I did talk with my dad, and who was also a violinist. And I said, Dad, it's got to be the violin. It's got to be my voice, or it's got to be swimming. And I'm thinking about music. So we said, well, if you stick with your violin, you'll always have your violin, but you may not always have your voice. So I decided I would try out my voice. And I made the Yale Glee Club and the Yale Alley Cats. And turned out it was, and then Andrew, I did swim intramurally then with Saybrook College. So it's not I missed out on the swimming and enjoyed that immensely. But that was actually one of the maybe the major decision in my life from a personal standpoint, because I've sang with the Alumni Chorus. I've sung, now just completed 50 years singing with the University Glee Club of New York City. It's been a fantastic journey. I'm on the Yale Alley Cats alumni board. Music and singing has become a really important part of my life, but I'm in the pool every day. So, you never know how these decisions are going to go, but that was really a major one.
That really connects with something that Nicole said earlier too. I hear a resonance between these things, which is that one of the biggest challenges faced by almost every Yale student I interact with is having to choose between all of the many things that we're passionate about. And the energy and the excitement that can come around that, you know, meets up against our real physical limitations, our energetic limitations. Andrew.
Oh, just, you know, sort of something that Nicole said sort of struck a chord as far as, like, you know, sometimes the roommates that you have in your freshman year don't always work out, so to speak. And, you know, I mean, you know, looking back on it, obviously you realize that everybody's trying to find their way. They might have challenges. They might have been under a lot of pressure, but at the same time, you know, you are a student, you're not a counselor yourself. So the important thing is when you are in situations like that, to reach out to, you know, your freshman counselor and people like that. And I think one of the things I think that you know, my concern with, I guess, with students, especially more today than even in the past, you know, it's like there's a lot more pressure, I think, in today's time than there was in the past. And the importance of seeking out resources, I think, is even more important than it ever was. And sometimes it becomes the whole, well, you know, you're supposed to be a super person anyway because you're going to Yale and you have something to prove. And sometimes people look at reaching out to people as a form of weakness. You know, I'm supposed to be able to do everything. I'm supposed to be the captain of this and that. And you're not reaching out when you should. And I would say that if that's not an issue, find those people now so that when you are in that situation, you have that resource already at hand, as opposed to trying to find those people when you're in that situation. So just the importance of, I mean, you know, even the fact that this program exists, there's a lot more resources in there everywhere. And I really hope that people take advantage of it at all levels. And especially when you don't need it yet, because eventually you are. And when you do, it's good to walk through that door. Another thing I always think about is, unlike Nicole, I'm actually an introvert. So the trick was to become an extroverted introvert. So if you told me, you know, years ago that I'd be teaching for a living, I would have laughed at you. I said, oh, getting in front of hundreds of people and talking about something. But the importance of finding something that you're passionate about, you find that, well, it's not really about you. It's really, if you're about passion and you're about trying to change the world, you have to get over that shyness and that insecurity. And you're not going to really learn anything or better yourself until you really find out what's troubling you. You know, a lot of times, you know, especially with the audience that we're talking to now, it's like, you know, sometimes you might feel insecure about whether it's economics or your sexuality, whatever. And it's sort of like, well, what about that is making you uncomfortable? What about that is making you feel less or whatever? And then really drill into that. You know, is it you that's uncomfortable with it? Is it people that you're around? And then really sort of facing what you're upset about or concerned about, and then turning that into a positive. What can I do to research that to me understanding it better? How can I understand more about it so I can explain it to other people? Because a lot of times these things are the elephant in the room that everybody's thinking about that nobody wants to talk about. And it's like, instead of thinking, even in teaching, oh, I hope they never ask me that question. That's the very question that they're going to ask you. So instead of being insecure about it, why not have an answer for it? And be able to answer in such a way that people think enough to like, oh, I never understood it that way before. And now I could think about it better, or I could help you act upon changing that because now I understand your viewpoint. But at the same time in doing that, you also want to make sure that you sort of manage your candor in the sense that, you know, if you're going to places that are insecure for you, it might take you to a hard place. And you want to make sure that you're not going so far down that road to help someone else understand something that you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So how do you give enough information that you're comfortable with to talk about, but still have that security to educate people and come back from it? And as you sort of go out for different resources and talk to different people, it's a skill set that we're developing throughout our lives. You know, how do we have that conversation, especially in today's times with the importance of having these uncomfortable conversations? What do they look like? And when they happen, how can you have that conversation to come up with a positive outcome? What does that look like? What kind of information do you have to be armed with? How are people going to have that conversation? Because if you think about it and you do a little research before that time, when it happens, then everybody is more at ease than they would have been assuming that that problem never occurred or no one's ever going to actually try to broach that topic. So whether you're introvert or extrovert, you have to get over it and go with it and try to figure out how to have that conversation.
Yeah, and that'll look different for each of us, right? So thank you for bringing that up. Each of us will negotiate our own different boundary or set of boundaries around that. Nicole or Barb, no pressure to answer this question, but I'm curious if you want to say anything more about challenges that you faced during your time at Yale and how you managed those and negotiated them.
So I think for me, in terms of addressing elephants in the room, I think I hadn't reflected so much on on class or notice its impact so starkly until I was in extended close contact with people across class lines at Yale. And so I think the Yale experience is very different for everyone, and perhaps for your interests, but it may also be that we may not want to admit this even to ourselves, but class does affect it. And I think that Yale and elite education spaces are not class or social equalizers, though they may help increase financial stability in the long term. So I think the class challenges will come out in, well, no, I can't take an unpaid internship and have skin in the game in certain industries, as is the expectation. I think, limiting extracurriculars or free time that, you would use to make other kinds of, to make friendships or other kinds of connections because I'm working odd jobs, explaining why you can't split a restaurant check evenly because you could only afford one drink and not the full thing, so I think that that there can be like bigger moments or smaller situations where this will come up. And I was really involved in advocating for like FLY or first generation low income, like issues related to structural campus issues that continue to this day. But I don't know that I always process the personal like class related challenges in real time, or if I have to share them so much with non-FLY community members. And I do think the predominant culture in this country teaches us to not talk about money openly, be that like, in school or related to job salaries, and in ways, because I think self-worth and morality are arbitrarily assigned to it. And so I think for FLY students, class does have to be considered, and money does play into decision-making and circumstance out of necessity. And yet others that haven't necessarily given class a conscious thought, especially if you're in like SES, like socioeconomic status homogenous environments. So even if we don't talk about this elephant in the room, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect us. And I think sweeping it under the rug does like continue to perpetuate inequalities and discourages us from uniting and make change. So I think this is a challenge that encapsulates our whole society. It's not just unique to Yale. I think that Yale and Yaleys, students, alumni, etc., do have plenty of influence and resources, and therefore responsibility to try to exercise in making positive, just change. So I would say that this was a big challenge that happened to me during Yale.
As for me, I agree that there are a lot of things that were unspoken, but I found almost everything challenging. Adjusting to life in the States, academics, even having the right kind of clothes for the weather, and my health was even being exposed to a whole new population with foreign viruses and bacteria. My first weekend, I was so sick, and I missed all the meetings and all the introductory information that students would have gotten the very first week of school because I had gotten, exposed to something, and just going through that process of having to figure out the health system and on all that right away was through a big wrench. And so some of my challenges are still being solved even nowadays. So it's not everything was resolved while I was at Yale. The typical challenges that all students go through were intensified and expanded, like homesickness, because there was no phone service between the United States and Bolivia, where my parents were at the time. And you had to make advanced reservations. So if anything came up that you felt maybe you could try and at least get some advice from parents, or, you could call for another 2 weeks. And so by then, hopefully it was resolved or you had gotten over it. And also, like, what do you do on, the breaks for Thanksgiving or all those kinds of things? And so those things are starting to be addressed better at Yale. And I hope that we continue to be able to solve challenges like that. And as you come through them, make people aware of those things so we can address them with you and help you as you go through some of these that maybe had happened before, but people hadn't spoken about them.
Well, I have kind of an unusual, perhaps silly thing to mention, but my mom, we had no money, but my mom was selling these dresses, and unbeknownst to me, she was saving some money so that I would have a suit when I graduated Greenwich High School and when I went to Yale. And so she bought me what at the time was known as a zoot suit. Does anybody know what a zoot suit is? It comes right up the shoulders and it goes right down to your ankles. And it's like a triangle. So I put my zoot suit on and people were just looking at me and snickering and all this kind of thing. And I thought, at first I thought something was wrong with me. Then I realized it was the suit. And so I retired the suit. And as I thought back on it, it was something that was the wrong thing to do. I should have worn that suit because that meant so much to my mother. It meant so much to me.
Thank you all. I want to ask us to fast forward a bit now and to reflect back on the ways that your time at Yale, whether inside the classroom or outside the classroom, has affected the way that your professional life unfolded after that. And I want to ask you to think of maybe just one major way. And the reason is because you all have had really illustrious careers and have been working on a lot of things, even if you only graduated 2 years ago or more than 50 years ago. So I know there's a lot you could probably say, but if you could share just one way that your time at Yale has affected your professional life since graduating.
Well, the first and foremost thing is the path that I've been on for all my life is based on my senior project that I did at Yale. It was a senior project in industrial hygiene. At the time, I was the head of the epidemiology department that was running it. And just to quickly talk about it, I wanted to be a doctor when I first went to Yale. So I wanted to be pre-med, but it was like, I guess the point was, how do you rethink about that? Okay, you want to help people, but I also had other interests, architecture and other things, psychology. Do I necessarily have to be a doctor to do that? So Yale was an opportunity of, even if it's not your major, whatever, take all sorts of classes. I took classes in architecture and everything else. I got a chance to do drawing and everything else. So when this opportunity came, it was like, industrial hygiene. It's doing the same things that I want to do as a doctor, but just in a different way. And by having something introduced that I would never have seen before, I didn't have that Yale experience, it, revolutionized the way, I live my life. I'm able to do the exact same things that I want to do when I was thinking about helping people way back when, but I had the opportunity to think about it in a different way because I allowed sort of Yale to think about what I'm interested in, give me opportunity to see how that can be done in different ways.
When I was graduating in the mid-50s, it was a major event taking place, historic in our larger society, and that is that the AFL and the CIO, the two elements of the labor union movement, were merging. And so I decided I was going to write a thesis on the democratization of labor unions in the United States. And my thesis advisor got me a job as a labor union organizer in New Haven. And we proceeded to organize the Knights of Columbus Insurance Company. I say all of this because it had such a direct bearing on my life going forward. Wound up going to the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell on the recommendation of my thesis advisor. And I wrote a major paper there, and I wrote it on the experience in New Haven of the organizing effort that we made, and went back and interviewed all of the union leadership there. So there's something about Yale in New Haven. There's so many opportunities in New Haven to augment and enhance your intellectual enrichment and your experience. And even today, I'm very involved with the Boys and Girls Club of New Haven because it's part of that community where I learned so much and get an opportunity to give back. And so I know that at the time, I think easily 40 to 50% of my fellow students were involved in one thing or another, whether it's a big brother, big sister, or whatever it is, one or many of the organizations in New Haven. But that is something that I suggest that when you have the time and the interest, for those of you that are watching this panel, to take account of and to give some thought to.
My experience at Yale made me appreciate that there were others who enjoyed learning and excellence, and that intellectual curiosity and the ability to grow and change one's mind is an asset, which I think is very unique to a place like Yale, because I especially looking at others who went to other universities and my peers, and I really see that that was filled within me at Yale and gave me the courage to continue to be that way. And I think that it might not have been that way afterward at some other university if I didn't have that experience I had at Yale. So it was, graduation was indeed a commencement, beginning, and it gave me a strong core that I could rely on to face and understand life afterwards and to keep growing. So I thought that was what the experience at Yale gave me deep down.
I would say that, Yale is very much an experience. I agree. And, professionally, because Yale is an elite institution, it is a brand that goes with you wherever you go. And while at Yale, I studied and explored things I wouldn't have until much later, if at all. But I think that the network of Yaleys, other Ivy Leaguers, et cetera, to be in community with, they're all over the world. I feel that I run into Yaleys literally everywhere that I have been in the world. There's someone there, or you just find them randomly, or there will be an alumni community available. So I think it's on us, how much we tap into those networks and to ask for help or for advice, learning and growing through that. And I think for Black communities, it can be difficult to ask for help, but I think that that's one thing that my experience at Yale has affected me with professional life.
Great. And so my last question for all of you is to think about the incoming first year students who are watching this, and what one piece of advice would you offer them? And actually, in all of your responses, you've already been giving lots of advice, but what one word do you want to leave them with, particularly at this really difficult moment in history that we are living through?
I think that I mentioned standing there in front of Connecticut Hall when we were first registering the first day as freshmen, and I was feeling so insecure. And on our 25th reunion, we were doing a look back, and we had a kind of a discussion of how that first day was for all of us. And as it turned out, everyone standing there was feeling insecure. So I think the theme there is that always remember that you have something to contribute, that you're a heck of a lot more than just another student. You're bringing an experience that's unique and that is appreciated, and that you're going to make a terrific contribution. You feel really good about yourself, and never worry about any insecurity, because everyone is insecure.
Yeah, I would say values, in the sense that one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life is that it's better to be happy than to look happy. And I think especially with an institution like Yale, people get caught up in the, you went to a certain type of university, you're supposed to be making a certain amount of money, you're supposed to be living a certain type of lifestyle. And I'm not anti-money any way, shape, or form, but money doesn't change things. It just magnifies the person you are. And I think it's something where if you think about what you want to do in your life and you become an expert at it, the money kind of comes, basically. Your goal is not necessarily to be a millionaire. It's to make a difference and do something that you enjoy and make a difference in people's lives. And if you're doing that, it's important to concentrate on that. So I would say, values and the importance of, knowing when you've arrived and knowing when you could reach back and help people in different capacities. It doesn't always have to be financial. There are other ways you can reach out to people and make a difference in people's lives.
For me, I would say that, that there are support systems in place and you can build your own as well. And community building, I think, is really important, both like giving and helping each other out as well. And definitely, you will click with some people maybe more than others, some may be more understanding or for whatever XYZ reason, but I think it's still important to learn there's something to learn, I think, with everyone that you encounter. And when you find, community with people, like, keep them close and don't hesitate to tap into your resources and ask questions as you would in the classroom, also do outside of that. You'll be able to make the most out of your time, however you choose to spend it. I think it will be a great experience for all of you.
I think you could also remember that as first gen, you don't necessarily think of yourself as being behind or trying to catch up, but think of yourself as being at the forefront and leading not only your family and your legacy, but bringing fresh ideas to old growth, and to communicate. Speak to your peers, your assigned advisors, your professors, your team captains or club presidents, your counselors. Go to office meetings with your dean. Make the meetings yourself if they haven't set them up at that point. And just think of it from their point of view also. They've spent their lives learning a subject and wanting to work with students. And like when my daughter was a TA at Princeton, she would feel sad if on some days students didn't come to office hours and didn't want to talk with them about this thing that she's been working on, you know, for so many years and become an expert at. And so they're there to help us. They want to help you. They want to share what their knowledge is and help you to grow. So please feel free to communicate. And also they want to hear from you. The things that you might think you want to hide from others, your background or your experiences, are exactly what make you valuable. And to share that with others really opens them up and opens you up. So please communicate with everybody.
Great. Thank you all so much. You've really shared a lot of yourselves, and we hear some really interesting parallels, but also differences in your experiences. And I do just want to reiterate this message that every single one of the FSY students watching this, we are all here for you. I hope you're hearing that message again and again and again in all of the panels and workshops and classes that you attend. And so I hope as a result of today's panel discussion that you can add 1stGen Yale to your knowledge and your understanding of the many, many people affiliated with Yale who care about you and want to see you succeed. So I'm going to pass it back over to Suzanne now to wrap things up for us.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Bearclough, for moderating and generating a really interesting, stimulating discussion. As I listened, I found so many points that were resonating with me. I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing their stories. Mark Barenblum, Barb Protasio, Andrew Burgee, and Nicole Sanchez Astapuma. And one thing in particular that I wanted to say, Marv is so humble. He didn't mention something about this in his biography, but he has been awarded the Yale Medal, which is the highest medal that's given to an alum for service to the university. And you said in Marv at the end that you wanted, when one of your pieces of advice was that for students to find some way to contribute. Well, you have contributed. So thank you, Marv, but thank you also to all the other panelists for being candid, for being empathetic, and giving our students a lot to think about. I wanted to tell you more. You've gotten about 1stGen Yale. So this is going to give you, to the first year students, the incoming students, I wanted to give you a sense a little bit more about what 1stGen Yale is. We are an entirely alumni-driven group. We are all done by alumni volunteers. You've met 4 of those alums today. We run a number of events since our founding in April of 2016. We now have about 2,300 alumni and students joining us. We have run over 25 individual programs and events to date, including 14 webinars during the pandemic, where we shared information and advice, and we're constantly doing more things. And this FSY program is one we're particularly excited about participating in. So I wanted to show you that there are other ways that you can get connected with 1stGen Yale if you like. Even if you're an incoming student, you don't have to wait till you've graduated to be part of us and to share in some of our events and programs, and to hear more from speakers like you've heard from today. So to all the first-year scholars at Yale, I want to thank you very, very much for listening. I hope that the discussion today piqued your interest in speaking more with our panelists on July 25th and with the other alums who will join us then. We look forward to being with you in real time, to hearing from you, not just talking at you, but to answering your questions, listening to your stories, and getting to know you and welcoming you into the Yale family. So we'll see you all on July 25th. Thank you.